Could one of India's longest-running conflicts finally be coming to an end? For over half a century, the country's been battling an armed rebellion that's caused tens of thousands of deaths, disrupted entire regions, and challenged state authority. Indeed, the Naxalite Insurgency has been one of the most prolonged and deadly uprisings in the world. However, at long last, the Indian government believes it's gained the upper hand and has set a deadline of March 2026 to finally defeat the rebels. So, what exactly lies behind this decades-old conflict? Why has it persisted for quite so long? And is there really any prospect for peace? Hello and welcome. If you're new to the channel, my name is James Ker-Lindsay, and here I take an informed look at international relations, conflict, security and statehood. Unlike conventional wars, insurgencies can be incredibly persistent. While some are resolved quickly, either by military action or through political negotiations, others can last for decades, sometimes spanning generations of fighters and outlasting numerous national governments. This longevity can be shaped by many different factors. Often fed by deeply rooted social, political and economic grievances, they can also be prolonged by a sympathetic local population and the ability of insurgents to blend in with the communities around them. In addition, geography usually plays a crucial role. Insurgencies often fare better in challenging terrain, such as mountains and jungles. India's Naxalite insurgency is a good example of how all these different factors can come together to sustain a long-term rebellion. Despite continuous government offensives, several attempted peace processes and high-profile development initiatives, the various groups behind the insurgency have waged their campaign across large parts of India. However, after many decades, the government now feels increasingly confident that it can beat the uprising. The Naxalite insurgency is located in what's become known as India's Red Corridor. At its height, this covered a huge area stretching across India from the northeast to the southwest. However, in recent years, it's been steadily pushed back, and today it affects a significantly smaller area, mainly focused on states like Chhattisgarh and Jharkhand. The population of the region is highly diverse. It includes indigenous tribal communities known as the Adivasi, Dalits, a historically marginalised group within India's caste system, impoverished rural population, and what the Indian government calls other backward classes, or OBCs. While the region is rich in natural resources, including coal, iron, bauxite and manganese, many of these groups have long felt excluded from India's economic and political progress. And it's this that lies behind the insurgency. To understand the origins of the Naxalite movement, we need to look at India's post-independence history. After ending British colonial rule in 1947, India began an ambitious programme of economic development. But while this led to industrial growth within the cities, the rural areas, especially regions dominated by tribal communities and lower caste groups, were often left behind. In addition, these regions often faced other social, political and economic problems. For a start, India's political system, while democratic, failed to address the concerns of its most disadvantaged citizens. On top of this, land ownership was profoundly unequal. Powerful landlords owned vast areas, while small farmers and landless labourers often struggled to survive. Finally, mining and the exploitation of natural resources often caused enormous environmental damage. All this fed deep resentment amongst many of India's marginalised communities, making them especially susceptible to radical ideologies that promised revolution and social justice. As a result, by the 1960s, communist groups were beginning to gain traction. Influenced by global leftist movements, particularly Maoist ideology from neighbouring China, which called for a peasant-led revolution, several factions of the Communist Party of India, the CPI, began embracing revolutionary strategies. While this often led to ideological splits, it also paved the way for militant offshoots. And it was this that set the stage for the emergence of the Naxalite insurgency. The Naxalite movement first emerged in 1967 in the village of Naxalbari in the state of West Bengal. Inspired by Maoist revolutionary ideals, a group of communist activists launched an armed uprising against local landlords. From there, they hoped to ignite a peasant revolution to overthrow India's government and establish communism. But although the Naxalbari uprising was quickly crushed by security forces, the movement lived on. From its base in the northeast of India, over the next decade it spread to other parts of the country, finding support in areas with similar experiences of rural exploitation and social injustice. It also became more organised. While the movement began as a loose collection of different and often opposing factions, by the start of the 1980s it had evolved into a fully fledged insurgency, with militias like the People's War Group, the PWG, emerging in Andhra Pradesh. Despite government crackdowns and continuing factionalism, the movement gained strength throughout the 1980s and early 1990s, particularly in areas where state institutions were weak and economic grievances remained unresolved. As a result, by the late 1990s, the Naxalite movement had expanded significantly. As well as reaching into new regions, the insurgency grew and became better organised as many of the competing revolutionary groups started to coordinate their activities and even began merging. For example, in 2004, the PWG merged with the Maoist Communist Centre to form the Communist Party of India, Maoist. All this led to an increasingly bitter and brutal conflict as the Naxalite groups used a mixture of guerrilla warfare, ambushes, attacks on police stations and government offices, and targeted assassinations to challenge the state. Indeed, at their peak in the 2000s, when estimates suggested that they had between 15 and 20,000 fighters, they controlled significant swathes of territory, even establishing parallel administrations in some areas. Meanwhile, in addition to the efforts of the security forces to wipe out the rebellion, anti-Naxalite militias also carried out atrocities, forcing tens of thousands to flee their homes. All this had profound consequences. Indeed, as the death toll rose, the then Prime Minister, Manmohan Singh, went as far as to call Naxalism the country's biggest internal security threat, ahead of rising communal tensions, Sikh extremism, ethnic unrest in the northeast, and the threat from Muslim militant groups in Kashmir. I hope you're finding this helpful. If so, please consider giving it a like and perhaps subscribing to the channel if you haven't already. It all really helps. Thanks so much, and now back to the video. Although the government mainly focused on using armed force to crack down on the insurgents, often deploying large numbers of troops to the affected areas, there were also some limited efforts to engage in peace talks. For example, in 2004, the government of Andhra Pradesh opened negotiations with the PWG, but without success. Likewise, over the following years, several other states opened talks with Naxalite leaders. But while they offered the rebels incentives to end the fighting, such as an amnesty program and promises of political inclusion, these efforts also failed, often due to mutual distrust, ongoing violence and internal divisions amongst the Naxalite groups. As a result, the government launched another major crackdown, Operation Green Hunt. Running from 2009, this saw large-scale military offensives against Naxalite strongholds. While armed counterinsurgency remains the primary focus of Indian efforts to defeat the Naxalite groups, the government's approach has nevertheless changed over the past decade. In 2017, the government launched a new initiative, the Samadhan strategy. In addition to using armed force, it took steps to address the deeper-rooted economic and social problems that have fueled resentment and fed the rebellion. This included launching large-scale infrastructure projects, such as building more schools and roads, and introducing other measures, such as tribal welfare schemes and employment initiatives. The aim of all this is not only to dismantle the Naxalite networks, but also prevent further recruitment. Overall, this combination of sustained military pressure and improved governance has produced notable results. Over the past decade, the insurgency has been significantly weakened. As well as forcing the Naxalite groups to retreat from many of their former strongholds, data suggests that Naxalite violence declined by 70% between 2010 and 2023, with falling numbers of deaths amongst both security forces and civilians. But while all this suggests that the insurgency is steadily being defeated, much remains to be done. The groups continue to operate. For example, in January 2025, a bomb attack on a police convoy led to multiple casualties. All this has demonstrated that the insurgents can still carry out significant armed operations against security forces. But despite all this, the government remains optimistic that it is winning. Indeed, speaking soon after the attacks, the Indian Minister for Home Affairs, Amit Shah, repeated an earlier pledge that the insurgency would finally be eradicated by the end of March 2026. So, is this deadline feasible? Security analysts remain divided on whether this ambitious goal is achievable within the given time frame. On the one hand, supporters argue that the government's comprehensive counterinsurgency efforts included targeted military operations and large-scale infrastructure projects have significantly weakened the Naxalite movement. The reduction in violence, combined with improved intelligence gathering and coordinated state-level initiatives, suggest that the insurgency is in fact in its final stages. Moreover, government investment in roads, schools and employment programmes has begun addressing some of the deeper socio-economic grievances that fuelled and sustained the rebellion. But balanced against this, others are more cautious. Arguing that deep-rooted issues continue to exist, they suggest that eradicating the insurgency as a whole will be difficult. Moreover, as they also note, the Naxalites continue to operate in remote and challenging terrain where the state presence remains weak and the military often finds it difficult to function. This makes it easy for even relatively small bands of fighters to regroup. Meanwhile, as long as marginalised communities face economic hardships and social discrimination, this will provide fertile ground for recruitment. Finally, sporadic but high-profile attacks indicate that the insurgents are still capable of mounting significant operations. Ultimately, the question of whether the Indian government's approach to the Naxalite insurgency will finally see the end of the 60-year rebellion remains a topic of intense debate. While it's clearly winning the military campaign, the challenge is to tackle the root causes of the problem, without ensuring deep-rooted and sustainable solutions to the fundamental issues that have driven the insurgency, such as land inequality, lack of economic opportunities and political marginalisation. Reaching a permanent military victory against the Naxalites, one of the world's longest-running rebellions, may yet still prove to be difficult. I hope you found that useful. If so, here are some more videos that you might find helpful. Thanks so much for watching, and see you in the next video.